those who enjoy studying biblical prophecy, including the book of Daniel and Revelations. This series will allow you to understand in detail what the biblical prophecy means and how to interpret them as they are written. We invite you not only to listen but also to share with many people you may know that are interested in listening and becoming familiar with the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. So we invite you to pay close attention because we cannot do it alone, nor should we. Welcome to our devotional, Humana, where we listen to and obey the Lord's word. Who would have known but to be able to understand the prophecies of Revelations? First, we must study the prophecies of the book of Daniel. And so I'm inviting you this morning to begin with a text in Daniel, chapter 1, and we'll make a quick review to get started. Daniel was a young Jew who was very intelligent and lived in Jerusalem towards the end of the years 600 before Christ. And during that time, the Chaldean Empire, that was also called the Babylonian Empire, because the capital city was Babylon, there was a king ascending into power named Nebuchadnezzar. This Babylonian army invaded Israel, which was called Judah, between the years 605 and 607 before Christ. And many Jews, including the children of important families, were taken to Babylon as prisoners. Amongst them were Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. If you'd like, you can read Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 6, where you will find this reference. When we talk about Daniel, Daniel had a natural talent. Daniel had a natural talent he received from God, and God manifested himself in his life. And soon this gave him a position in the Babylonian government. The God of Israel, whom Daniel remained faithful to, gave him the talent of interpreting dreams and manifested various visions to him along with their meanings. This week we will develop how these dreams and visions were prophecies of great empires that would exist from that moment until the second coming of Jesus Christ on earth. And everything begins in chapter 2, so if you are going to take notes, please do so. We'll begin in Daniel chapter 2. Shortly after Daniel began his public function for King Nebuchadnezzar, this king began having strange dreams. And in chapter 2, verse 1, it says that he had a very disturbing dream. And so he called his counselors to give him the interpretation of the dream. And the king said to them, "So that I know that you are not lying, not only do you need to interpret the dream, but you have to tell me what the dream was, what I dreamt. And if you cannot do it, I will have you killed," as it says in verse 2 through 5. These wise men of the king, in other words, the astrologists, magicians, enchanters, they had no idea what the dream had been, and much less its interpretation. And they said to the king in verse 11, "It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." Very angry, the king gave the order for the wise men to be killed, including Daniel and his three friends. When Daniel found out about the king's decree to kill all the counselors, he asked for an opportunity to tell the king the dream and its interpretation. And Daniel's petition was conceded. And before going to meet with the king, Daniel shared the news with his friends. And so they all began to pray and ask the Lord for help. And so God revealed the dream and the interpretation to Daniel through a vision. Verse 19. Remember that we're reading Daniel chapter 2. When Daniel presented himself before the king, he told him that there was a God in heaven who revealed secrets, and that God had not only revealed the dream but also its interpretation. Verse 28. Daniel explained to the king that he had seen an impressive image standing in front of him. And this giant image had a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, core and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet and toes of iron and mud. Verses 31 through 33. And a stone of supernatural origin, cut not by hand, says verse 34, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, says verse 34, and broke them in pieces. Verse 35 says that the stone became like a shaft from the summer threshing floors, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, what does this all mean? Remember that the Bible interprets itself. Daniel, in this case, or God through Daniel, gave the explanation. And Daniel said to King Nebuchadnezzar that the image represented 4 kingdoms that would surge one after the other to dominate the world. And he said to the king, "You are that head of gold," meaning that the Babylonian Empire was the first of these 4 great empires. Verse 38, "And after you another kingdom inferior to yours will rise, and then a third kingdom of bronze that will dominate over all the earth, and the 4th kingdom will be strong as iron. And because iron can break all things into pieces, it will break everything into pieces," say verses 39 through 40. "And the last kingdom will be a divided kingdom," says verse 41, represented by the feet and toes. "And this empire will be strong like iron, conquering everything in its way." Pay close attention, because here it says that this empire eventually would be represented by 10 kingdoms, which are the 10 fingers described here, but which would last a short period, because iron and clay do not form a strong bond. Because at that moment, according to the prophecy, and we'll study this, Christ will return to destroy this empire and the rest of the nations that will fight against him, and he will establish the kingdom of God, and it will never be destroyed, says the Bible. In Zechariah chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. We're on the last figure, which is the stone, and it says that this stone breaks or destroys the image into small pieces, and this represents God's coming kingdom, where Jesus is the king. And for this we will read in time Revelations chapter 11 verse 15 and chapter 17 verse 14. Look, remember when Jesus speaks in many of his sermons and teachings, he refers to himself as a stone that was thrown out by men, but then became the cornerstone. And so in the context of God's kingdom, Jesus said, "Who falls upon this stone will be broken, and over who the stone falls on, they will be broken into pieces." Very interesting. Then Daniel reveals the dream and its meaning to King Nebuchadnezzar. And so the king bowed before Daniel and named him chief over all the wise men of Babylon. So what should we do with the story of chapter 2? Well, we need to join it with chapter 7, because chapter 7 no longer talks about just the 7 empires represented in an image, but it will show us and represent 4 kingdoms through 4 animals. And we will study these in detail. So the idea today is to give you a general view, so that little by little we can study according to the Bible where Daniel's prophecies lead. Okay, so if you go to chapter 7, Daniel describes a dream and a vision, announcing 7 consecutive kingdoms to come, occupying the time period from the Babylonian Empire until the end of days. In this dream, Daniel sees 4 beasts, as it says in Daniel chapter 7 verse 3. The first was a lion, the second a bear, the third a leopard. The 4th beast was dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth, and it was devouring, breaking into pieces, trampling, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns, eyes like the eyes of a man, as it says in Daniel 7 verses 4 through 8. After Daniel asked for help to understand the dream, look at what God says to him in verses 17 through 23. Thus he said, "The 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are the 10 kings who shall rise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the ones who were first, and shall subdue 3 kings." And so notice that this prophecy of Daniel 7 is confirming the dream of the king Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2, in which 4 great world kingdoms rose. So look at how interesting. We'll join these because they reveal, for example, the first kingdom, it says it was Babylon, represented by Nebuchadnezzar. The second would be the kings, so the kingdom of Media and Persia. And the third, which would be another beast of Daniel 7, is the kingdom of Greece. And the fourth kingdom of Daniel 7 reveals that it would have 10 horns, representing 10 kings. And the 10 horns represent 10 rebirths or reestablishments of this kingdom. And so throughout this week, we will dive into this very interesting topic. And notice that the events that God predicts through this dream of Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 and the vision of Daniel 7 will develop in time. And look, these four kingdoms were kingdoms that existed. The Babylon Empire existed, as well as the two that followed, identified in Daniel's vision, because history shows us that the Babylonian Empire reigned from the year 625 before Christ up to 539 before Christ. And just as God predicted through Daniel, the following kingdom was the Medo-Persian. And according to history, this empire beginning 538 before Christ up to the year 300 before Christ, when it was defeated by the Greek Macedonian Empire, led by Alexander Magna. And within a period of 3 years, this empire conquered the entire Persian Empire, as history says, beginning the year 333 to 330 before Christ. This was done very quickly, powerfully, cunningly, and precisely this is why it is represented by a leopard. Shortly after Alexander Magnus died, and the empire was divided, because it says that it was divided into 4 generals, and Daniel 7 talks to us about it. Daniel 8 speaks about this regarding the generals it had. And finally, a fourth kingdom appears that according to history is the Roman Empire that governed beginning the year 31 before Christ up to 476 after Christ. But this kingdom was also affected by many divisions, and this is why the image of Daniel chapter 2 is of a kingdom of iron, but that was mixed with clay. And as Daniel predicted, it was incredibly strong, cunning, cruel, and his kingdom conquered all the kingdoms that preceded it without any mercy. And so if we follow this story closely, we'll see that these prophecies will be fulfilled, even in the smallest detail. Tremendous how Daniel was able to know so long ago, imagine the year 600 before Christ, that these 4 great kingdoms would be formed in the future, and everything by God's inspiration. And remember, there are 2 feet in the image of Nebuchadnezzar, because the Roman Empire was divided in 2. One headquartered in Rome and the other one in Constantinople. And the prophecy that God reveals regarding the great empires after Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's vision are coming to pass. Tomorrow we'll talk about the 4 beasts, and we'll talk a little bit about what each kingdom did, and we'll see how this will lead us to the future. We'll talk about Daniel 9 and what the meaning of the prophecies of the 70 weeks mean. And so this is going to be very interesting, so pay close attention, and we'll continue with this tomorrow. Pray with me. Father, thank you because you are a God who, in time, sees it all and knows it all. We want to have the right disposition to understand and study the biblical prophecies, to discern the times, and to understand that each day your second coming is closer. Thank you for each listener of Mana. I pray for their lives, and I ask you to bless them, to guard them, and to fill them with the Holy Spirit. And may your love and your grace accompany them always. We commend ourselves to you, and we ask for your blessing, and I wait for you tomorrow in our next devotional time. Blessings to all.